Let's cross now to Melbourne, where I'm joined by Victorian Senator, Deputy Nationals Leader and new Minister for Agriculture, Bridget McKenzie. Thanks for joining us, Bridget, and congratulations.
Thanks, Chris. It's fantastic to be with you, and I'm obviously thrilled and humbled to be Australia's Agriculture Minister. Yeah,
it's a big job. So often in the past we've seen National Party leaders take agriculture when obviously they get to choose as Deputy Prime Minister when they're in government. So it's a massive portfolio. Interesting bit of history that you're the first woman to have the job.
I happen to be a woman, but I guess as a National Party senator, we do really value the role that agriculture plays for regional Australia. Our local economy is obviously a huge employer and driver of local economies and profitability and prosperity, but indeed for our entire nation. And we've got 85,000 farming businesses across this country of a $60 billion industry. So there's a lot of work to be done, a lot of challenges at the moment, obviously, particularly those with drought, etc. But I'm really excited about the opportunity to help agriculture in all its diversity reach $100 billion by 2030. So I've already rang the NFF president, the National Farmers Federation, for those that aren't aware, and we're really excited to work together.
Just on the gender thing, though, I don't think there'd be too many areas in the country where the cooperation of men and women is so essential in the day-to-day life of these small businesses. I mean, essentially every farm, whether it's the bloke doing most of the hours on the tractor or not, they are very much shared enterprises, and women have a massive stake and say in what goes on.
Absolutely. It's an absolute partnership, and I think that's often forgotten for those who aren't out in regional communities that see this every single day. Someone, whether it's the husband or the wife, stays at home and gets things happening there. Others go and get the cows in, for instance, in a dairy enterprise. So it's very much a shared responsibility. So I think the role of women in agriculture is something that's becoming more understood and appreciated over recent times. And so obviously I'm looking forward to working with both men and women in agriculture. It's an incredibly diverse industry. We've got the dairying, obviously, horticulture, and don't forget our fishers and our foresters too, who do also play a role in our primary production. I think if you look at the election results, regional Australia voted very much in favour of the National and the Liberal parties. They knew and understood how reckless and damaging electing Bill Shorten and the Labor Party was going to be, not just to our mining industry, obviously, but to agriculture. And I'm looking forward to delivering on that faith that they've placed in us.
And what's your specific agricultural background?
I'm the first generation born off the farm. So I guess from a lived experience, I've grown up in the regions. My family has been involved in primary production since they arrived in the 1850s. My grandfather was a high country cattleman, and obviously we had poll Herefords and some sheep as well. But unfortunately, my grandfather only had daughters, so the family farm was sold. But having always grown up in the regions, I understand intrinsically the need to have a strong and prosperous agricultural sector to the prosperity of our regional towns and centres. Indeed, I coming from being the Senator for Victoria over the last 8 years, I've worked heavily with the dairy industry here and the horticultural industry specifically.
There's some irony in that, isn't there? I mean, I know that you'll get some sort of feminazis who'll attack you for what you just said then about how unfortunately you only had daughters, but that's been the way.
How it was.
It's been the way of the land in the past, that if farmers didn't have sons, they didn't end up passing on their farms. That's maybe not the case anymore. But there's a beautiful irony, though, in that same progeny has produced the nation's first female agriculture minister.
Yeah, I think you're dead right. It was the way it was. I'm probably the only grandchild that wanted to be a farmer, but I'm really excited to work with the industry. And I think once the family does sell the farm, very hard to get it back. And so that's why I'm proud of our government under our former Minister Littleproud's leadership took a suite of policies to the election which actually focused on, that next generation, the intergenerational change of family farms, which is the backbone of our industry. So very excited. One of the other issues, obviously, is getting those agri-terrorist laws in place so that we can jail those people inciting individuals on farm to steal stock and terrorise farming families.
Yeah, I was going to come back to that, but let's do it now. No, let's do it now, seeing as you've mentioned it. The issue here is that interests me is obviously a lot of the state governments are passing new laws to increase penalties for vegan and other activists who charge on the farms or piggeries and the like. You're looking at some federal laws to add even more bite.
Yeah, absolutely. So trespass laws obviously are the purvey of the states, and I think it's fantastic to see so many of our state governments actually backing our primary producers and their right to privacy, their right to run safe and sustainable enterprises and not be subjected to the ideological, agri sort of terrorist behaviour that we've seen in recent times. It's quite terrifying to think that people in Australia think it's okay to walk onto somebody's property, let the stock out, indeed create biosecurity risk. But at a federal level, a lot of those incidents that have occurred in recent times has come as a result of the use of the internet and obviously almost crowd sourcing individuals to sort of join en masse into these sort of actions. So our laws deal with anyone who's in an online environment that is inciting individuals to undertake that sort of behaviour will face jail terms up to 12 months. I thought it really, disturbing during the election campaign that the Labor Party and the Greens couldn't even come out and back a very simple measure that would stop farming families and indeed businesses being terrorised like this. So I think that sort of highlighted the difference during the campaign of the side of politics that backs our primary production and industries and the other side of politics that's very happy for mining and agriculture to be the underpinning economic piece of our nation, but not prepared to back them in any real form with legislation that would protect their prosperity.
I've got to say I agree with what you're doing on this issue, and I agree with what the state governments are doing, Labor and Liberal, because this is a big issue. We've raised it a number of times on this show, but I don't like the use of that term agri-terrorism because to me it diminishes or demeans the real issue of terrorism where innocent people get killed.
Well, I take your point. I guess I find it completely offensive and very upsetting that people in Australia think they can disregard the law, indeed, and go onto break in, essentially, to someone's private property, steal their stock, damage their business through biosecurity risk, and somehow it's okay. And the response the response from the judge here in my home state of Victoria for handing out a $1 fine to one of the young activists, I think is absolutely appalling, and I think the judiciary actually needs to look at it the way it conducts itself in, sentencing and handing out fines.
Some of the trouble your colleagues got into for criticising the judiciary too. Now, another issue where this sort of activism plays out, of course, is live exports and a lot of activism to try and shut down any live animal exports in this country. Where are you on these issues? Is there more for you to do?
Well, I've met with live sheep exporters in WA over the last year whilst this issue has been running. It's an extremely viable industry and I want to see it continue. So you
unequivocally support the industry?
Unequivocally. Absolutely. I want the live sheep export trade to continue, and we know how important that is, particularly in Western Australia, but also the flow-on effects of any seeking to minimise that trade at all would have on our billion-dollar live beef trade. So I'm absolutely behind live export. We know here we have farmers that are great animal husbandry. We've put some protocols in place and made some regulatory changes after the recent Moss report, and I'm confident that the industry will go from strength to strength.
Now, the drought. Obviously, there are large areas of the country gripped by drought. When will you get an urgent briefing on that? What are the next steps required there? I understand some parts of at least the south, perhaps the most southern parts of the drought-affected areas have started to get a bit of rain.
Yeah, well, obviously, drought is a responsibility of Minister Littleproud. He's been leading the task force and he's been doing an amazing job, and our government particularly under Scott Morrison, who on the first day became Prime Minister, I was with him when he headed up to Quilpie to visit farmers that have been in drought for upwards of 7 years. And it was fantastic to see him this week head out with Deputy Prime Minister to Cloncurry to visit those farmers who'd been subjected to further difficulties. As part of my ministerial roles previously meant I was supporting those communities affected by drought with $1 million for those councils to keep people employed locally and keep those small businesses in country towns ticking over whilst their farmers and the productive capacity of the broader region was struggling with drought.
So I think does Barnaby Joyce... You finish.
Oh, yeah, sorry, Chris. So what I'll be doing is getting some briefings on that this coming week when I head to Canberra, and I will be getting out into drought-affected communities as soon as possible.
Right, sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to ask whether Barnaby Joyce continues on as the special envoy on drought, or he's obviously missed out on promotion back into the front bench. Is he going to be a special envoy any longer?
Well, my understanding, reading the Prime Minister's announcement, is that Minister Littleproud has specific responsibility for drought. We take our drought response very, very seriously. Minister Littleproud is in Cabinet, and we are standing shoulder to shoulder with our drought-affected farmers and their communities, not just right now at the critical phase, but into the recovery. The longer the drought goes, we know it's going to take longer and longer for people to restock and get back on their feet.
What does this say about Barnaby Joyce's role, the former leader's role, back in Parliament now, in government? What does it say about his role in that government?
Well, Barnaby's been an absolutely fantastic contributor to our response, not just to the drought, but to championing the needs and interests of regional Australia for his entire time in Parliament, whether it's been as a backbench senator or indeed as he's moved through the ranks. And I'm sure he will absolutely continue that. He was returned in the New England with a fabulous result, which really is testament to the fact that he is a fighter for his community and indeed for regional industries and people, and I'm sure he'll continue to do that.
Now, you must be disappointed, while of course you're very pleased to have won government, you must have been disappointed that you couldn't haul back Indi in Victoria. Yeah,
very frustrating. And, you know, we've got more work to do there, and we will continue to do that. I've shifted, obviously, my office to Wodonga, so I'm looking forward to getting out in the community. We had a great couple of coalition candidates there in Steve Martin and Mark Byatt, but obviously Cathy McGowan brand is very, very strong. The new independent Helen Haines, however, is no Cathy McGowan. And I think as we see Helen's contribution in Parliament, we'll see that I'm not sure her policy agenda really backs the agricultural capacity and the values of the broader Indi electorate. So we'll just watch that space.
Yeah,
I'm really excited, though, to see the diversity in our ministerial team. It's not just about a record number of women or indeed our first Indigenous Cabinet Minister in Ken Wyatt, but it's we've got regional Australians in there, and I think that was a real lacking in terms of the Labor Party's policy platform. They didn't have people from the regions actually assisting them make that, which is why they were such a failure out in regional communities as a value proposition.
And quite a bit of youth, to be frank. You've got a lot of young talent coming through, but I did want to bring you back to identity politics to finish off with, because Scott Morrison's obviously, he's made a big thing about the number of women, and it is significant given, of course, the heat the coalition has worn over the past few years about the so-called women problem. You must be happy that you have so many females in such prominent positions, in Cabinet in particular, and they're going to present such a face to the country where the leadership of the government is going to be a much more accurate reflection of society. Well, I'm probably not a great believer in you've got to have women for women's sake. I think you've got the privilege to be in Cabinet. It's got to be on merit, surely. Exactly, Chris. And I think each and every one of my Cabinet colleagues, male and female, are just absolutely fantastic contributors, highly articulate and intelligent people that are really going to be focused on delivering on our mandate for, the whole country. We've also got quite a diversity of backgrounds. We've got tradies in our ministry. We've got teachers. We've got our lawyers. They're politicians after all. Journalists, have a few lawyers. No, not journalists. Don't let journalists in there. Oh, thanks so much.
The diversity is so important, and I think that's what's been missing in our political discussion and discourse over recent years. I'm really excited what we're going to do. It's a great privilege to be able to work for the Australian people over the next 3 years.
Thanks so much for joining us, Senator Bridget McKenzie.
Thanks, Chris.
There you go, the first female Agriculture Minister, her first interview in that job.